Can atheists be spiritual? Hi, my name is Britt Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director. I'm here with Pepperoni today. And right off the bat, just that title, atheist spiritual director, confuses people because if you're atheist, then you'll probably say, why are you advocating for spirituality? Isn't that like the supernatural and spirit? And then religious people get mad because how can you be spiritual and be an atheist? But I stand by it. I have a master's degree, almost doctorate in theology, and I lost my faith in God in theology school while seeking God, which is very common. The more you actually read the Bible, the less you actually believe that it comes from God, because it gets very human and very messy rather quickly. But I had also spent decades now studying religion, philosophy, and theology, trying to gather tools for the good life. So there I was, 35 years old. I had built my life on the existence of God. It was all of my knowledge, it was all of my schooling and experience, and then God died for me. So now what do I do? So people in this space often talk about rescuing the baby from the bathwater. Sam Harris, says, I love that baby. So to me, doing a 2-year program in spiritual direction on top of my master's degree helped me to be able to actually separate the tool, the thing that is good for us, from the supernatural belief or the truth claim or the dogma that's been wrapped around it, so that you're building your life with all the benefits that religion has provided. And don't say that there aren't any. There's a reason that we co-evolved with religion. There are benefits, but hopefully we can throw out the bathwater. So let's talk about that and why I think that you should be a spiritual atheist, why I think it gives you the best of both worlds, and what that means. So first of all, let's define spiritual. The reason I use this word, words in this area are just always going to be really hard. But the reasons that I use this word and not a secular word is because we don't really have a secular word for the umbrella of everything that spirituality covers. There's no way for me to say like connection, awe, ritual, meaning, purpose, love, community, art, inner work, all together in a word that also denies the supernatural. So because religion stole from everywhere for its own purposes, I think we should steal some of these words back, because at its core, spirituality just means connection. It's connection to your deepest self and connection outside of yourself. It's connecting deeper to the world around you and deeper to the world within. This is why we have so many symbols of spirals in spirituality, or eyes in spirituality. Eyes because you can see more outside of you and see more within, and spirals because you're always connecting deeper outside of you and also connecting deeper inside of you in a spiral or a labyrinth. So for some, this includes a higher power like a god. For me, it doesn't. It doesn't include the supernatural, but I'm still a part of something that's bigger than me, which is the universe and the human story that I'm deeply connected to. So spiritual atheism means let's take all the tools that are helpful in the religion, the connection, the inner work, the awe, the meaning, the moral values, but just without God and without the messy business that we are obviously bad at of trying to prove one God over another, and all the problems and biases and the problem of evil and all of that comes with that. The reason I think that this is the best approach is because you get the best bang for your buck. You get the most amount of tools with the least amount of downsides. Like if I subscribe to Mormonism, for example, I would get on a platter the second I walked in the door: community, story, meaning, awe, moral education, raising children, community, transcendent experience, ritual. But there's a high cost. I'm going to pay 10% of my income to this church that has billions of dollars. None of that is going to go to the poor. I have to obey my husband as the priesthood leader of my home. I have to keep my mouth shut. I have to sacrifice my authenticity to kind of fit in the box of like Mormon woman. I have to cover my body because I'm responsible for men's thoughts. I have to do all the invisible labor to keep the church going. And then there's just also a lot of spiritual bypassing going on that really is going to inhibit my human development. If you don't like confrontation, you just say, oh, I feel Satan here, so I'm not going to engage. Or if you feel a bad feeling, you're told from the time you're a little child to just like put on a smile and just like repress that. Or if you don't want to think too hard about something, you just get to obey someone else. Like, oh, they did the thinking for me. And if you don't want to go through the process of grieving and feel your feelings, then just go to a Mormon funeral and we'll all imagine together that that person is in heaven so that we don't have to process hard things. So as a Mormon, I would also be more prone to conspiracy thinking, more prone to us versus them thinking, more prone to black and white thinking, because that's how your brain is formed. And all of that is going to inhibit my growth as a human. So spiritual atheism says, what are the things that science shows is good for us, which is why this is sometimes called just the science of happiness or spicy psychology. And how do we access those tools with as little dogma and truth claims and nonsense as possible? And that's how you get the best of both worlds, because we function best when we are in between order and chaos. That's why so many of our creation stories feature a play between order and chaos. So fundamentalism, too much order, very bad for you, very bad for humanity. Nihilism, too much chaos, you don't have enough tools, is paralyzing. It's existential crisis and suicide and numbing behaviors. So for me, spiritual atheism is a great way to find that middle ground where you can thrive between order and chaos, but you still have much more room to grow than religion will allow you to. So how did religion become beneficial, and how do we kind of extricate these tools as an atheist? So we've all laughed at these videos where she pretends to be inanimate things. If you haven't seen her videos, she'll like pretend to be a toaster, or she'll pretend to be a printer. And it's hilarious. She's a national treasure. But this is also explaining the basis of our religion. It's called hyperactive agency detection, and it's essentially our best theory for why we're so superstitious by nature. It's our ability to imagine agency on things that don't have agency. This is why Disney can imagine cars being people, or animals talking, or toys that are alive, and we are all on board with this because we have this tendency to be able to put agency onto things that don't have agency. So even without brainwashing, we will create supernatural explanations for things. We are the descendants of ancestors who had overactive imaginations when there was a rustle in the bushes. The ones that thought that's probably nothing, or that's probably just the wind, died. The ones that thought that's probably a lion lived. And the evolutionary benefit got oversimplified or overplayed. So when we walked by a tree and had a thought that ended up coming true, then that tree is sacred and it's magical, and because it's mysterious where thoughts come from at all. And so we need to make an offering to it. And now that tree is part of our religion. So this little quirk that we have as humans, where we kind of over imagine things and assign agency to things, kept us alive, but it also created us to be very superstitious, where we are fully sure of supernatural elements around us. So even if one God or one religion was real and all the rest are just sure of their delusion, we have to realize then that most people are then delusional, even if you believed that there was one God or one religion that was true. And so the interesting side effect to being on guard and being imaginative as early humans is it incentivized us towards superstition. And when we were small tribes, maybe that was good to share that delusion, because it created shared myths and that supported stronger communal bonds that were good for us. But now in the modern world, our delusions are bumping into each other and we can't converge on any kind of shared reality, and that is a big problem. So over time, this hyperactive agency detection bias started packing more and more things into it. It became a vessel. Religions are a vessel for essentially every single human fear and every single human need. So all of these studies that show that religion is good for you or good for society, or there's even evidence that people over COVID did better if they had religion, it's not because of the beliefs. The beliefs don't matter. The beliefs all contradict each other. The beliefs are just the shared myth that creates the vessel, and the stuff in the vessel can be good for us. So let's talk about kind of what's in that vessel and how can we get that without you having to believe things that are unbelievable, especially in the modern world when we have better explanations for things. So the first tool we want to rescue from the bathwater here is awe and connection. And we have science on this. We had a really big study on the science of awe. And awe is this state of mind that we developed when we're confronted with something big. It humbles us. It makes us more kind. It increases gratitude. It also has a social element. We let go of grudges and resentment. It's a great way of snapping out of our usual negativity bias, which is another thing we get from evolution, and seeing ourselves as part of something bigger. It's very good for us. So the question is, how do you feel awe? and how can you integrate that into your life? That's your spiritual path. That's your practice. For some, they become eclipse chasers, or for my partner, it's his Ironman competitions where people gather to celebrate kind of the triumph of the human spirit. And he finds it intensely spiritual. He cries the whole time. He'll go and volunteer to be at the finish line of these things because it's such a spiritual experience for him. Or maybe it's getting a telescope and making that a, Sunday night activity. The question is, how do you feel awe? The next tool that we want to extricate is just connection. How do you feel connection? Because that's really what spirituality is. So at the bottom of this tree, we see awareness and connection. And so there was this major study done where we asked people how they have this feeling, and we started to group them. And we have these kind of 7 main branches. Of course, it can be more individual than this, but this was just kind of the main takeaways from this study of all the ways that people feel this. And people are familiar with like the meditation branches. Everybody feels like they should meditate. Oh, I should meditate. I should do visualization. I should do a loving kindness meditation. I should have a gratitude journal. People like know that is spiritual, but there's this whole other part of the tree that we haven't even called spiritual that for a lot of people is their connection. And that was really freeing for me. So we have the creative branch, people who get into their flow state, whatever their creative state is. And that's what helps them to feel connected to others and also connected to themselves. People who are, even stand-up comedy can be this, music, singing, arts, poetry, sculpture. I mean, there's a lot of things that people are doing that is creative, that really is their spiritual practice, even if they haven't called it that. We have activism where there's, pilgrimage areas to of social justice. There's work and volunteering, vigils, marches. And we know that for Gen Z, that political activism is one of their ways that they're becoming religious. It's how they have like an in-group and an us versus them. It starts to act like a religion. But activism is a place where people feel connected to their values and also to outside of themselves. We have this relational branch, which I hate that men in religion, especially patriarchal religion, have looked down on. Like, why do you need to go out with your girlfriends? You need to stay home and read your scriptures and pray because that's more important. But for many people, that relational aspect really is their connection and their spiritual practice. Deep listening, storytelling, dialogue, podcasts. Podcasting for me, when I did podcasting with Bill Reel, I did it for about 2 years. It was a deeply, deeply spiritual practice for me to kind of work with something and prepare something and kind of talk things out in conversation. I felt very connected to the world outside of me and also very connected to myself. And I realized that writing and conversation and podcasts and girls' lunches and girls' text groups, that this is actually spiritual, even though nobody's called it that. Movement, this is the people who wake up and they don't go running because they hate themselves or they hate their body, but it's actually how they feel connected. For my husband who goes on these long runs or long bike rides, it's almost meditative for him. And it's where he feels connected to nature and outside of himself, and also where he has some, breathing exercises where he's finding those places within himself. It's also where he's doing shadow work, on these endurance kind of rides. And so for some people, it's movement and yoga and dance and labyrinth walking and walking meditations that really is their spiritual practice. And then the last one is like ritual, cyclical. I would call this more like pagans or Wiccans, for example, where they're doing retreats or ceremonies or rituals that are always calling them back to themselves. So, I have a friend who, every full moon, every solstice, whatever's going on with the earth, she's very connected to it. And that helps her stay very connected to outside of herself and also what's going on inside of herself. So these are just different ways that we can experience connection. And you do need to find yours and integrate it into your life. And that is your spiritual practice. The next tool I want to talk about is one that atheists especially really struggle with, but I think they're missing out on, and it's tools for accessing your subconscious wisdom. So much of what we have called spirituality is how much we didn't know what's going on in our own brains and what our brain was doing outside of our conscious attention. When we prayed and got an answer, it felt like it was coming outside of ourselves, but our brains are complex enough to ask and answer its own questions. When we get good thoughts and bad thoughts, we think, oh, maybe that's Satan and a trickster god and and a good God, and they're battling in my brain. But we can explain thoughts at the level of the brain without gods, battling over your brain space. Manifestation is just priming your brain. It's really the law of attention more than the law of attraction. Pendulums, dowsing rods, tarot, these are all tools that help you to access your own subconscious wisdom, and your subconscious is really at play here. Psychedelics is, turning off our user default mode and diving into what's going on underneath the surface of our attention. Same thing with dreams. And so I think atheists sometimes don't have enough tools or mediums for accessing their own subconscious wisdom, but religious people or astrology people or whatever the belief, that people are wrapped into, they get trapped into believing that their medium is magic. No, your brain is magic. You are receiving 11 million bits of information per second. That is what's coming into your body. You can attend to 20 bits of information per second. Your brain is a vast computer and you have a tiny sliver of attention. And so when people say, oh, he can't have known that, it's magic. Or, I had even on psychedelics, I had once a guy who started speaking really good French. He didn't speak French normally, but he read French poetry sometimes in college. And that self, like his French poetry self and his regular self, started talking to each other. Now you can call that magic, but until we account for how much the subconscious is doing and how much the brain is doing, we don't have enough justification to jump to the supernatural. So for atheists, you can use tarot cards just for symbolism work. You can do dream work. You can do psychedelics. You can do writing, especially like flow writing, journaling, meditation, visualization, body work, story, myth. I've danced with Sufis. I've gone to pagan nights with witches. I've done labyrinth works. I've done retreats. I've done Enneagram work. I've done Jungian archetype work. I go to temples wherever I'm traveling. And you can get the benefits of all of these tools and mediums that just help you tap into what's going on underneath the surface of your attention without getting sucked into the dogma and truth claims. And we just simply appreciate the tool and the experience. The experience and the connection to your own brain gives us everything that we need, gives us that connection and those tools without getting sucked into the trap of biases when you start to believe that this is actually magic, or this is the real God, or astrology is actually real. And then you start only seeing the world that way because that's your bias. And that's when you lose all objectivity and you just get sucked down whatever rabbit hole that you're in. And that's what we're trying to avoid, because eventually that's going to limit your ability to be flexible. It's going to limit your ability to grow. It's going to limit your ability to change because you're going to only see things based on what you're believing in. All right, the next tool that we want to extricate is morality. We want to focus on, instead of horizontal morality, which is this is moral because God said so, we want to do the vertical morality. I'm moral because this is the kind of world that I want to live in. Even if no one else is doing it, even if no one else is moral, this is the game that I want to play, even if no one else is. There is very strong evidence, scientific evidence, that living a moral life makes you happier. I also think that you can't truly have inner peace if you don't live a moral life. So for example, if as an atheist, I don't believe anything's going to happen after I die, I don't think there's going to be any consequences to my actions. If I had an opportunity to steal $1 million or fraud someone out of $1 million, and I knew for sure that I wouldn't get caught, I still wouldn't do it. And people ask why, like, you don't believe in God? Like, why not take the money? Because if I bought a mansion with that $1 million, I would not be able to sit in that house and be at peace with myself. I would always have to be, I'd always have to have the TV on. I would always have to be on some kind of drug, my phone or some kind of actual drug, in order to be at peace with myself, because I would know that I wasn't acting in a way that I would want everyone to act. I know that I wouldn't be at peace with all the aspects of myself and my values. So even if I could get away with things, or even if God really isn't watching, living a moral life makes me happier internally. It also accounts for better relationships. It also puts my effort towards what I want the world to be, even if it's not that way. And all of that is really good for you. All of that is a part of the science of happiness. The next thing that religions do really well is stories. They return to the same stories over and over from the time that you're a child, and they keep digging into these stories, and they have these reminders, and they have a liturgical calendar that returns you back to these stories. So at Easter time, they return to the Easter story and resurrection, and hope, and you return to the story again and again, and it has rituals, and that's really good for our psychological state. It's really good for like the rhythm and heartbeat of our life, and it's just really good to return to stories over and over that inspire you and bring out kind of your best self. And so the question for you, or if you tend towards atheism, or you don't want to have, weird stories from the Bible thrown in there that aren't good for us or that cause a lot of problems in the world, the question then is, what are the stories that guide your life? For me, one of those stories is like Les Mis. And it's something that, I watch with my children, and I see every time that it comes to town. It's one of the stories that really impacted my life. It's a very powerful story. And I keep those stories around me. I keep images of those stories around me. If you were to see my wall over here, if I can turn my camera, I have lots of pictures that just remind me of stories that have changed my life that I want to return to again and again. All right, another thing we have to talk about is culture. Religions are good at creating culture. It is very hard for secularism to create culture. It'd be really hard for America to do. Some people say, well, we can do this. We can have atheistic secular societies really well. Just look at the Scandinavian cultures. Scandinavian cultures have a small, homogenous group of people that have culture outside of religion. That's not what we have in America. What is white culture in America without Christianity? Like, we don't even know what it is. We destroyed all other aspects of culture. And so in these conversations, this is where we always look to the secular Jews, because the secular Jews have been able to do this transition that very few other religious groups have, which is that they've been able to let go of truth claims over the past 5,000 years, and specifically after the Holocaust, in order to hold on to the aspects of culture and not require beliefs. And so they are getting the best of both worlds. If I had a Jewish history, I would really love to be a secular Jew. I love that they still do bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, but they have a rabbi atheist, but it's still good. It's still just part of the community. It's still part of their story. It's still a really good rite of passage for teens to gather everyone and celebrate that this child is becoming an adult. That's really good for us. So the thing that you have to do if you're not a secular Jew is that you have to, if within your own family, kind of create a family culture. And that is hard to do. It's harder to do than it seems. And some people, when they leave religion, kind of underestimate how much work that takes if you have children to be able to create a family culture. What are your holidays? What are your stories? What brings you back to your values? What are the things that you do that are unique to your family? How are they going to feel at home, your children, and help them grow identity and purpose and belonging and things that are really good for kids. So as a spiritual atheist, I do labyrinths, I do mushrooms, I go to witchy events where we, the last one that I did, we collectively let things die in order to invite new life because it was Samhain and it was just kind of time for winter to come. I've done tarot nights where you're just playing with your subconscious. You're just looking at the symbolism and allowing your subconscious to fill in the gaps. I read parables from Jesus and the Buddha. I have rituals and holidays and traditions that I've developed that fit the values of my family. We celebrate May the Force be with you on May 4th. We gather before a meal, which I really like when families gather and mark values before a meal, but I didn't want to pray to this like genie god, my wish list to this genie god. So I hold hands with my children and we say Ohana. Ohana means family. Family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. We say that before a meal when we're all gathered together. I read moral stories to my children Sunday morning, and it's our church time. I try to live a life of morals as best I can, not because I have to, but because it's the world that I would most want to live in, and it also creates a lot more inner peace and happiness and better relationships. I visit old cathedrals. I created a community with others that sustained me when my youngest daughter had a traumatic brain injury. And if that would have happened right after I left religion, I wouldn't have had community. But because I had intentionally created community, I had meals and people helping me when I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. This past Christmas, I went to a Mormon church with my family and sang songs for Christmas. Someone once accused me on TikTok of just creating my own religion as if this was a dagger of an insult. Absolutely, that's what I'm doing. I built my own religion with all of the benefits of religion, all of the benefits that religion has for both myself and my children, without the sexual abuse and the patriarchy and the violence and the spiritual bypassing and the conspiracy thinking and the magical thinking and turning off my brain so that I can value faith more than rationality. Absolutely, I created my own religion, but I don't have to turn off my rational brain to do so. And this is where I think Ayaan Hirsi Ali kind of went on a different life path than me, because she was dealing with nihilism and depression and had a dark night of the soul. And instead of going back to Islam, which is where she had come from, she just jumped on board onto Christianity. And she admits that she has to turn off her rational brain to do so. You're never going to get wholeness and a really good sense of inner peace if you have to turn off a part of yourself in order to get tools that make life worth living. So it's like when Christopher Hitchens asked, what good thing can't I do because I don't believe in God? I've built a life of meaning and purpose and community and connection and love and morality and ritual and awe. But ask yourself the opposite question. What's a bad thing that can be done in the name of God or in the name of your supernatural delusion? You can open up just the paper today, like just open up USA Today and find 50 examples. Across history, there's millions, billions of examples, because we're so sure of our delusions that we cause immense harm in the world. So yes, an atheist can be spiritual. Everyone knows what it's like to be an atheist because you don't believe in all truth claims and all million gods. I think there's 4,000 gods today that are kind of available to be worshipped. And then there's also the astrologers and the crystals and the astral projections and the supernatural claims. And they all contradict each other and counteract each other. They can't all be true. So in light of that, and in light of how superstitious we are and our 180 cognitive biases, and we're still finding more, we need to be skeptical to these claims, because that's when we're really open. Skepticism means we're more open to what reality is or could be, because we're not just seeing from our bias. Now, that doesn't mean that I have faith in materialism or I'm just a materialist or determinist. It's possible. I don't make any claims about objective reality because I don't know. I don't even know if we are interacting with reality at all. We're so biased and we create reality as we see it. So to me, skepticism to truth claims, given how superstitious we are, is the best way to go. It's the best way to remain open to whatever magic of reality is. And when you do the work of creating your own religion, you get all the benefits and tools from religion, especially for children and teens, and then you don't get the downsides. Remember that skepticism is actually the best way to keep an open mind, because being skeptical doesn't mean that we're just going to keep everything on an even playing field. Like maybe it could be magic or gods, maybe it's not. Now, if we were the only humans and we had no history, then yeah, maybe it's gods and spirits, but maybe it's not. But look back at human history. We have tens of thousands of years of superstitious beliefs. We have said it's a monster under the bed 1,000,000 times, and we look back and it was never a monster under the bed. So some say here that I'm just too skeptical. It really could be a monster under the bed. You don't know. And it's like, yeah, but given what we know about human nature and the 1,000,000 times beforehand when it wasn't a monster under the bed, we can start to be skeptical of this claim. Think of it this way. Religion and science only move in one direction. Think of something that was once explained by the supernatural that is now better explained by science. I can think of at least 1,000,000 examples. Now think of one thing where we used to have a scientific or naturalistic explanation, but there's actually now a better spiritual or supernatural explanation. It doesn't move that way. So to me, when there's this many gods, this many truth claims, this much superstition in our nature, this much cognitive bias, there's never been a monster under the bed. When we look back and we say, yeah, we were sure, but we were wrong. Then we need to exhaust naturalistic explanations before, including what our brain is doing and everything that our brain is doing, before we have any justification to jump to the supernatural. And right now, for me, there's not enough evidence to make a jump into the supernatural. So the best play is to rescue the tools that have been housed in religion, tools that are good for combating nihilism and existential depression, tools for the good life, tools for happiness, tools for thriving, and stop playing playing games with gods because we are just bad at this game. We have to recognize that we are bad at this game. So for more on this, check out my book, No Nonsense Spirituality, where I go through the tools of religion and how to integrate that in your life in a way that's authentic to you. Go to my website, check out my course. I do a whole course on secular spirituality specifically, if this is interesting to you. And then I also mentioned on this video Jungian archetypes. So if you want to dive into, especially if you're atheist and you struggle with maybe that connection to your subconscious because you're skeptical, I do a whole course on kind of Jungian archetypes and dream work and mythology work and that inner work piece, but I'm using it as a tool, even tarot, and I'm using it as a tool and not as a, this is magic or the planets are governing your personality. I do it without any of those truth claims if that side of things is interesting to you too. And then stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to do a big video on meaning and purpose. As we're starting a new year, it's maybe time to check in with what is your meaning and purpose. And if you tend more towards atheism and skepticism, that's one that you have to really pay attention to because it's not going to be served on a platter for you from religion. And so we're going to check in with what is your meaning and purpose. So stay tuned for next week. And that's it for me, Britt Hartley.